What happened next happened by mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was, and it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No.
She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this and you think, what?
I didn't want to tell anybody.
You'd be ridiculed,
yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, you know, I was like shocked. I mean,
how could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones,
Look at that.
blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science. That organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million.
We're finding soft tissue in dinosaur bones now. This apparently has been there all along, but nobody was looking for it because everybody knew that the dinosaur bones are millions of years old. But it turns out inside of these things, we're finding stuff like this. Does this look millions of years old to you? Soft, stretchy tissue. This is from the inside of a tyrannosaur leg bone, by the way. And inside of this, further examination reveals blood vessels and blood cells. This is tyrannosaur blood. Millions of years old? Or thousands of years old? What's the more reasonable interpretation here? In fact, further study of this has revealed DNA within some of these samples as well. And DNA has actually been tested to see how quickly it'll break down, even under optimal conditions. Even if you freeze DNA and keep it in an anaerobic environment, it'll still break down naturally over time. After 6 million years, it'll all be gone, again, even if it's frozen and anaerobic. Of course, being out in a rock formation in Montana somewhere, this stuff is not frozen and it's not anaerobic, so it's going to break down a lot more quickly than that. But these samples are supposed to be 65 million years old, 10 times as long as the longest theoretical lifespan of DNA, yet we are finding DNA within some of these samples. So again, this is an argument for these things being thousands of years old, not millions.
Mary, Jack, and their team published their B-Rex findings in a series of papers in the journal Science and were promptly attacked. Critics said their samples might have been contaminated, or that the supposed blood vessels were actually something called biofilm, a type of slime. But as Mary showed us, she's been able to replicate her findings. These are pieces of an even older dinosaur, a well-preserved 80-million-year-old duckbill. When she dissolved it away in acid...
Let's put this under the scope here.
Well, look.
Is that a blood vessel?
This is a blood vessel.
You're
You
kidding.
see the branches right there? And look at all of them. And it's so consistent over and over and over again. We do this bone and it comes out and I get excited every time. I can't help it. I mean, 80 million years old.
Mary published her new results last year, and while some of her critics have been swayed, the controversy still rages, and the stakes are high. If blood vessels can survive 80 million years, what about DNA?
Here we have an actual photomicrograph of what appear to be red blood cells inside a blood vessel. These are within an unfossilized section of bone from a Tyrannosaurus rex. All tests to date have been consistent with the finding that the red blood pigment hemoglobin is also present. How then can this dinosaur bone be millions of years old? Not just the hemoglobin, but also osteo-calcium protein in the bone. Now this is virgin bone, not permeated by minerals. So the proteins there have not been replaced by minerals. They're still intact. The problem is we know that protein bonds rupture with time, especially the covalent bonds of DNA, the bonds between the nucleotides, but also the bonds between amino acids in proteins. When they rupture, they liberate a small amount of free energy. Therefore, according to the second law of thermodynamics, they have to rupture the bonds with time. It's just a matter of time. Like water has to run continually downhill, not uphill, and the more time there is, the more downhill it will run. Well, the question is, how long does it take for all these bonds to rupture? In seeking to find the answers, scientists examined mummies, ancient Egyptian mummies that we know historically are about some 4,000 years old. They compared them and their protein structure with mummies less than 1,000 years old to see how much protein bond rupture would take place in a 3,000-year hiatus. They found even in dry mummified conditions, the protein bonds were rupturing at such a rate that it appeared the proteins would completely be dissolved, all the bonds ruptured, no complete intact protein in as little as 50,000 years. DNA with its covalent bonds that are even more delicate, it would only take 10,000 years, 10,000. Yet here we have largely intact hemoglobin and largely intact osteo-calcium protein. Now they did 4 different tests trying to confirm that it was not hemoglobin because they didn't like it. All the tests, however, came back positive. The most significant one, they injected some of this into laboratory rats to see the response of the rat's immune system to the protein intruder. Now God has given us and animals amazing, complex immunity systems that are actually able to analyze a foreign intruding molecule, an antigen, then by analysis figure out a molecule custom made to fit its three-dimensional structure, bind to it, and target it for destruction by the immune system. When they injected it into laboratory rats, the rat immune system analyzed it as a protein that was a hemoglobin protein, largely intact, and targeted it in that way. That's about as good as it gets in forensic science, that is largely intact. In fact, it's in about as good a shape as the ones we find in the ancient mummies, which we know to be only about 4,000 years old. Well, the flood, according to the Bible, was between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. So that's spot on for these things being only several thousand years old. They find these bones of the dinosaurs, and they say, that proves the rock is 65 million years old. But the bones have a different story. The blood has a different story.